morning. For me, it's just after 8 in the morning. Please yell at me if you can't see my slides. So first I was thinking, did you get me mixed up with someone else? Do I actually have anything to say about ad hoc teamwork? And I think I do. So I'm hoping though that, this is, for most of you, I'm guessing this is the end of the day, the end of this awesome workshop. So I was hoping to try to get some people talking. This could be an absolute failure since, we're in hybrid, but I'm hoping you all will work with me.
Mark, if you want, I can turn the laptop for you so you can see the people. Will that help you?
Ooh, yeah, I'd much rather see the people than just part of the slide. Hey,
That's
there
perfect.
are people there. That's
yeah,
awesome.
there are people there. They're a bit tired, but they're here. Yeah.
Awesome. And I did come up with this, the title for the talk before I really knew what I wanted to talk about. So there will be a little bit of explainability, but that's not going to be the focus. So what I mostly have been working on for the past 10 years or so is thinking about how one agent could teach another agent, or how a human could teach an agent, or how maybe even an agent could teach a human. So for the purposes of this talk, when we're thinking about ad hoc teamwork, I'm going to assume two things. The first is that the agents are going to be able to learn, because like Patrick was just saying, Deep RL is taking over all this stuff, which is awesome because I was doing RL before it was cool, possibly before it was useful. But now that RL is useful, more and more people are looking at it. So I'm going to assume the agents can learn, mostly in an RL framework. And I'm going to assume that there is communication allowed between the agents. Maybe it's not unlimited, but they generally can say something to each other. In the worst case, they could just observe other agents, and that would be a way of learning. But I'm mostly going to focus on communication. And I guess I had 3 goals. So I already mentioned one of them. I'm hoping to get some reflection, get some talking, get some questions going. I'd also like to highlight some existing work. Some of it's mine, of course, because I'm biased, but I will also highlight other work in the community. And I also want to point out what I think are some interesting future directions. So with that in mind, let me jump in. And the first thing I want to do is talk about one way of framing the kind of stuff I'm interested, thinking about agents teaching agents. So first, we've got the normal setting. So we have our agent that's interacting with the environment in a reinforcement learning setting. And for many people outside of the multi-agent community, many people think, this is the really interesting thing. And for me, it's much more interesting if there's more going on. So for instance, you could have a teacher. So now you've got a more experienced agent, and that agent could help the student out. So the questions that come up in this setting are, what should the teacher provide? When should the teacher provide it? Should the teacher say, here's some information, student? Or should the student be saying, hey, I'm confused, help me out? Or maybe it should be bi-directional. You can also think about, how much communication should you allow? One of the things I really like talking about is, can we make sure that the student can outperform the teacher? One of the settings where we've talked about this is, say you've got a robot at home, it's this home robot, it's done a bunch of stuff for you. Now you bring home a new robot, and maybe it's from a different company. Maybe it has very different capabilities. Maybe you can't just rip the brain out of the existing robot and put it into the new robot. So how can this old robot teach a new robot? That's one setting. And I really think there's a lot of work to do here. I don't think we've answered all these questions. But of course, you can always say, well, this is a nice setting. Let me make it a little bit harder because, NP hard isn't good enough. Let's throw in even more agents. What if I have multiple teachers? So now I've got, for all of you who have defended a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, now you've got your whole committee and they're all telling you these different things and you got to make them all happy. But who should you listen to? Because what happens if they have conflicting advice, or if one teacher is better than another? And maybe not all the teachers are paying attention all the time. So how do you handle that? You could also think of more of like a classroom setting or maybe a coaching setting where you have a single teacher and they're trying to figure out, should I be broadcasting something to everyone? So thinking of RoboCup, everyone push forward, or should I be doing things like saying, Agent 2, you need to pass? And all these students could be deciding, should I be listening to this, or is this for the team, or is he talking to Joe over there who's really confused and I don't need to worry about this? And then, of course, now I've got basically what looks like a neural network of advice going on. What happens when there's lots of teachers, lots of students, and everyone's kind of asking and telling, and who knows who's smarter, who has different abilities? And I'm going to argue this is getting more into the ad hoc teamwork setting. So now when we have multiple agents, we don't necessarily know who's a teacher. We don't know who's a student. We don't know who knows what. And figuring out how to work with other people and how to teach them. I think this is why what I've been researching is relevant to the ad hoc teamwork setting. At least that's why, at least I hope so. So I'm mostly not going to be talking about this huge, tons of teachers and tons of students, but I do think that what I'll be talking about could be useful in that setting. That's my hope. So this was my first framing, that I can think about the number of agents, so the number of students, the number of teachers, and all of that. But of course, the other thing, which I see we have been talking about earlier in this workshop, is what happens when I have humans in the mix? So again, second framing, I've got a single agent, that's the normal RL setting, but now maybe I've got a human. And that human could provide some demonstrations or feedback. Agent, go up. Or agent, that was bad. Agent, that was good. So you get the same questions. How should the agent use this information? How should they decide when to ignore it? When should you elicit more information? What kind of information is most useful? Also, now we could go back and say, okay, I've got a second agent, and I could do all of this type of teaching. Maybe I could do transfer learning. Maybe I should just give advice. Of course, you could also have an agent teaching a human. We'll get into this a little bit later, but thinking about intelligent tutoring systems. I've got all of these agents that know all of this cool stuff. How do I help people? How do I help people help me do something? If I'm in a kitchen and if there's a bunch of robots that are doing something and they don't have the capability, how do they get the sous chef to come in and help them in the right way? And then, of course, you can think about people teaching people, which is just the normal teaching setting as a professor. So I've kind of got these two different framings. And what I'd really like to do now is try to elicit some feedback. So this is for both people online. I've got the chat window open, but also people in person. I guess the first thing I'm thinking about is, do you think this kind of stuff fits in the workshop? And even if you don't, I'm still going to give the rest of my talk. Don't worry. So do you think this is useful for ad hoc? What is this missing? So part of why I'm asking what is this missing is because I wasn't willing to get up at 1 in the morning or probably 11 last night and be part of this whole workshop, unfortunately. And I know you guys have talked about a bunch of things. So what am I missing? What are some of the themes from the workshop that don't fit into one of these two framings? I'd love to hear that. So would people be willing to ask some questions for the in-person or unmute themselves online?
Yeah, I think I can start maybe with a very interesting point that came up earlier. We talked about norms. We played Hanabi. And we talked about the fact that when people play Hanabi for a while, there are some, exactly, this is exactly what we want to investigate. And it seems like there are some things that an agent picks up along the way while playing. So this is like online learning, which is very different from a lot of what has been done so far. Usually, even in ad hoc teamwork, you have some prior training but once you're deployed, you're just adjusting whatever you learned. But I don't know, we had the talk, I don't think it was in this workshop, I think it was earlier when we were organizing this workshop with Elliot, Arash, and Ignacio, and William. We talked about a spectrum between one-shot cooperation and on the other hand, you have lifelong learning. But you can find ad hoc teamwork all over this spectrum, even on lifelong learning, because it's still online in a sense, and it's still interacting with agents that you might still learn from. So I think that these are the main things that came up, in my opinion, during the talk. Maybe others will have some additional ideas.
Cool. I like the norms, because traditionally the idea of the norms formulation was very different from RL. And now it's great that they're actually coming together. And that idea of the spectrum, I think, is really important, thinking about, particularly for a human agent team. If I'm going, and we'll talk a little bit more about how humans might be part of this, but I believe that that one-shot human agent interaction is going to be so much harder than if that team can kind of coalesce, and having some pre-training or the lifelong learning, I think, is going to be really important for human agent teaming. So thanks a lot for that, Ruth. Other comments?
I don't know if you can hear me well, but I think one thing with the kind of student-teacher dichotomy is that I suppose in lots of real kind of, or lots of ad hoc type settings, you might be interested in a kind of two-way thing. So any given agent is both a student and a teacher, in that they have things to learn from each other. And I suppose in a sense that fits into the student-teacher framework, but it's kind of like taken out of the dichotomy and saying, okay, in some cases, agents are both. And this is important. It's also interesting. I think it leads to like a kind of different dynamic where both agents are mutually adapting to each other. And yeah, that has, I guess, its own kind of intricacies.
Yeah, and one thing I realized that I forgot to add to this is, especially if you're interested in students teaching each other, Felipe Leno da Silva has this great survey article on this. So if you haven't seen Leno's article on how, inter-agent transfer, multi-agent transfer, how agents can teach each other, that's a great reference. So that was a great point, that I'm mostly thinking about students and teachers, but really those roles could switch back and forth, or maybe it is bi-directional. So that's a great point. Thank you.
I'm probably just going to add like one point in terms of whether this fits to the workshop. I actually have a work that performs really well because it exactly learns from demonstrations from other people, from other expert agents in ad hoc teamwork. I have like an ICML paper in 2021, and I think the key factor that made our approach work was, although it doesn't actually contain any explicit teaching mechanism, it actually has an implicit one where agents learn from demonstrations. So what happened in our approach is basically when an ad hoc agent interacts within a team, it tries to do credit assignment by kind of figuring out, like, whenever joint actions happen, who did the best, who actually contributed the most to the team. And then based on parameter sharing, that kind of distilled some knowledge on what to do in that particular situation that is displayed by the teacher. So let's say, like, when an agent sees someone of an expert, let's say in a kitchen, and this agent wants to wash a dish as an example, and he sees a human that washes the dish. I think our approach kind of enables the learner to discover that using the dishwasher as an example is something advantageous. And with some parameter sharing, it kind of discovers that it kind of learns to associate, states that are close to, like, using a dishwasher as advantageous. And that ends up with bootstrapping, allowing the agent to learn that particular skill at the end in a much faster rate compared to not using that demonstration, not learning from the demonstration at all. And it was in fact like the deciding factor that made our approach much better than other baselines at that time. So it's definitely like relevant to ad hoc teamwork. There's a trove of useful knowledge that you can learn from other agents too, basically.
And so in this case, you're learning, one of the things you're leveraging is demonstrations. Are
Yes.
you assuming those demonstrations are optimal, or
No.
can they? No.
So-
Okay, cool.
So I did, like I mentioned, credit assignment. So there's a credit assignment method that measures, the value of all agents as action. So let's say in a kitchen, let's say there are some agents that are less of an expert, than they actually don't show an optimal performance at all. The credit assignment method actually helps you with that. It identifies, like, within a state which agent is doing well, and you use that knowledge to allow you to do the same thing whenever you are in the same position as that expert, as an example.
Actually, one other question. Are all of the agents or experts trying to maximize the same reward? So my understanding is ad
No.
hoc teamwork, typically everyone on the team is working together with exactly the same reward. But it sounds like in your setting, they don't necessarily have the
Yes.
same.
That's the case. So it's basically like a mixture, a mishmash of different agents with different levels of expertise. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool, thank you. Maybe time for one more comment. What am I missing? What else should we be thinking about? Oh God, it's late in the day. I need more coffee. Okay. So thinking about agents and humans, how they can teach each other, how they can learn from each other. Maybe it's bi-directional. I'm going to assume they all have aligned rewards, but that certainly doesn't have to be the case. Certainly when you're playing RoboCup, you want your team to win, but you also want the glory for yourself, because robots are really, no, probably not. But you could think of that. So the other thing, just setting up the framing, the other thing I was thinking about is, how do you evaluate the team? Let me actually advance the slide. Okay. So, I mean, one thing we could think about, like what Patrick was just saying, is thinking about the individual contributions of the team and to the team, and how you could isolate out particular agents with their contributions. Maybe that's a good way to figure out who should teach. But in general, if you all have an only agent team, you can think about things just like the score, the performance. You might care about things like the risk or variance. So if you're likely to get more points than the other team, but there's still a 49% chance you're going to go lose really badly, maybe you don't want that. But then the other thing to think about, once you have humans in the team, is one of the things I'm really interested in is trust. So if you have other agents, how much do you trust them? And do you trust them to the appropriate amount? So for instance, if a doctor is working with an agent and that agent is not perfect, the doctor better have a really good idea of where the agent is perfect and where it might not be. Another thing you can think about, and all of these could apply to agent-agent interactions, but I think it's more applicable to human-agent. Another thing is, how well can you anticipate others? So if a human can better anticipate what a teammate will do, I think that's one way of saying this is a good team. This team is working together. And the last thing I'll mention is, you could have two teams that are performing similarly, but the human has to think really hard and they are stressed out and they're sweating like crazy. Maybe you want to make things easier for the human. If you have two teams that perform equally well and one of them is easier on the humans, that might be something that you'd want. Okay, we'll come back to this later. But now let me go through first some of these different settings. So if I just have two agents, and if you've got full and free communication and the agents know everything about each other, maybe you can just do transfer learning. And there's been a bunch of work on that. That works really well. but it has a lot of assumptions. Another thing you could do is the simpler assumption setting is where you have the teacher deciding when to give some pieces of advice. So this is older work, the human agent transfer. Over 10 years ago, we were thinking about, I've got an agent that knows something and it can decide when to give some advice to a student. And the first thing you could do is early advising. The teacher's just going to give all the advice right at the beginning and then shut up. You could also say the teacher's going to be more selective about where it gives advice, and that works better. So if there's states that are more or less important, the teacher could give advice at important states. Another thing you could do is have the student, every time the student's going to act, it's going to say, hey, teacher, I'm going to go up. And the teacher could intervene only if the student was going to do something stupid. Turns out one of the better ways of doing this is to do some predictive advising. So the teacher's watching the student, and the teacher's going to give its advice. The teacher's going to use some of its advice when the student is about to do something stupid. And by doing that, the advice can be spread out throughout learning, and the student's able to learn much faster. So these are different heuristics a teacher could use to decide when to intervene and tell the student to do something. Some more recent work out of MIT and Northwestern was looking at when can the teacher learn? How can the teacher learn to give advice to the student? And here they've got a bunch of different ways of determining or teaching the teacher, this is a good time to give advice. So for instance, the value estimation gain at the bottom is looking at trying to watch the student's value improve. And, if you're helping the student's value, that's good teaching. So over time, you could learn a good way to teach a student. So this, if you're interested in learning about teaching students, this is a good one to look at. But you could also think of the other direction. So this was a work when we were in Canada. So for those of you who don't know, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are a thing. So our algorithm was RCMP, requesting confidence moderated policy advice. And here we say we've got a single agent, but it's got multiple heads. So that in a deep RL setting, we've got our state, we've got our hidden layers, and then we get our Q values at the end, but we have multiple heads, multiple sets of Q values, and they get slightly different training data. So when all these different heads, this kind of ensemble-like approach, when they agree, let's do it. When they disagree, if I really think I should go up, and this other head says, I really think I should go to the right, that might be a good time to ask for advice. So this is another way, this is another heuristic of trying to figure out where is the student confused. And if it was an important state, that could be even better. So if you're thinking about an ad hoc team, if I'm trying to decide, should I shoot at the goal right now, and I'm not sure, maybe that's a good time to ask for advice. There's also this neat work from Ercümen İlhan and his advisors. And they're doing something even more clever, where they had a model of the teacher. So what they would do is ask for advice. And then if you had run out of advice, if the teacher couldn't advise the student, then you'd go to the model of the teacher. What do I think the teacher would say? And we've got some work that's under development, which is doing something slightly different, saying if the student is confused, I'm going to look at the model of the teacher. Do I think I know what the teacher would say? In case I'll do that. Do I think I know what the teacher would say? No, I don't. That's when I go and ask the teacher. So you can think about all of this different kind of modeling. Who's modeling whom? And if I know if I think they're better than me and I've got a decent model of them, maybe I should just use that. That maybe I can incorporate that into my own decision making. So this is all single student, single teacher. And I do, well, in the lector case, there could actually be multiple teachers, but for now, let's just, for single agent, single teacher, I do think there's a lot of interesting research there that still has to be done. But you can see there's a bunch of different ways of possibly doing this, heuristics, there's learning approaches. And if you're thinking about, I've got this team, some agents have different capabilities, how can I leverage those? So that was just the simplest agent teaching agent setting. Now let me hop in to a little bit more complex. I've got a single student and multiple teachers. So one work I want to highlight is out of Daniel Kadenko's lab. It's 2-level Q learning. And they have it's simple, but I think quite effective. They've got this demonstration where they have a maze environment and they have 3 separate teachers. So expert 1 does really well in the left part of the maze. Expert 2 does really well in the middle. Expert 3 does really well on the right. And what their 2-level Q learning method does is figure out, first of all, which expert do I want to learn from? And can I take all of that expert knowledge and incorporate it into my own Q function so that I can figure out what to do and not listen to experts at all, because they may not be perfect. So I thought this was a really nice work, which had a really nice, this nice idea of figuring out who to listen to when, because different experts can have, in this case, different spatial expertise, but you could definitely think of, I've got one agent that knows how to shoot really well. I've got one agent that can defend really well, one agent that's running up the flank. So you could think, hopefully you can see where this would be useful. We recently had a JAIR article, which was Admiral, I've got to look it up, advising multiple intelligent reinforcement agents. So with Admiral, on the left, this is just an example of having advisors of different quality in one domain. And I realized 5 minutes before this talk that these domains don't match. That's why the y-axes are different. But on the right side is an example where I could learn here in red, I could learn with no advisor, or I could learn with advisors of different quality. And the idea with this paper, what Sriram was looking at, is how can I make sure that I'm not hurt by the bad advisor? So can I figure out quickly, I don't want to listen to this dude? Or again, thinking about the previous paper, can I learn from these two and ignore this third? One of the nice things about this work is there's a bunch of theoretical work showing how this is guaranteed to help you. And there are some other comparisons to other methods for how we could learn from multiple agents. I'll also point out that Sriram is awesome and is looking for a postdoc. I personally want him to come to University of Alberta, but if you know of anyone else that's looking for a postdoc, let me know and interested in this kind of stuff, and I'll put you in touch with him. So that was single agent, multiple teachers. Now you could have multiple students, single teacher. So here we could think about automatic curriculum learning. So figuring out how to generate a curriculum where I can get in a new student and help them learn quickly. And there's a bunch of work on that. One work I want to highlight is looking at reinforcement teaching. So the idea here is that we could take multiple kinds of meta learning. So for instance, curriculum learning or supervised learning for a supervised learning student. But in both of these cases, we can say I've got a reinforcement learning teacher that's helping out a student. So that reinforcement learning teacher is taking actions to help the student learn faster. So if the student was an RL agent, the teacher could learn to create a curriculum for that student. So for instance, the teacher could decide, first you're going to learn to pass, then you're going to learn to play 2v1, then you're going to learn 3v2 on the goal. Or you could start the student at different start states to make things easier or harder. And there are results showing that, yes, this works. We can learn, the teacher can learn to teach a reinforcement learning student. But where I think this is really interesting is thinking about, can I learn to teach RL students in general? We've got some preliminary results showing, oh, okay, they have different learning algorithms, or the students have different neural network settings, and the curriculum that the teacher learns still work. But there is a lot of interesting stuff that we can still push there. The last thing I wanted to mention is, I think something that's understudied is the communication aspect. So learning to teach, but also learning to communicate. So if I caught it correctly, Patrick was saying that in the RoboCup ad hoc teamwork, there is already a defined language that all the different agents can use. Things get much harder when now you've got two agents that need to learn to communicate. We did a small piece of work where we had one teacher that had kind of an overhead view and was learning to help multiple agents do something, and the student, they needed to learn an appropriate language. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, there is some ongoing work by a number of labs that are learning how to communicate. But if you can say, my agents already know how to talk to each other, that'll make things a lot easier in the ad hoc setting. Okay, so let me take a breath here. So before I go on to the last part, I just wanted to see what if people had reactions to that. What am I missing? What are they thinking about? Is this going to be useful for any of your research? I know it's the last talk of the day. Sorry.
I can go ahead again. The last thing you mentioned about communication, we've been looking at communication, and I think that there are two types, like you said earlier. There is emergent communication, and I think that Tom had an interesting talk today about emergent implicit communication even. So it's very, I think there's a lot to be done there. There's also William Mackey's work, who's here as well, on communication in ad hoc teamwork in general. So, and there you do assume that you have predefined protocols, and you need to reason more about when and how to communicate. So I think that these are the two types of communication that are relevant, and it's good to see that there have been some, like I've learned about some work that I didn't know about, so during this talk that might be relevant to look at. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruth. Yeah.
It is also like relevant to our work. So I think earlier today there was this work from Elliot. He's working on a problem called few-shot teamwork, where essentially you basically train different agents during the source task, and then they will have like different expertise. So basically the source tasks that these different agents are training on are different, and then hopefully you then try to train like another agent in a target task that is different from these source tasks. But essentially, you hope that these agents in these different source tasks could contribute to like different knowledge that are useful in the transfer task, in the target task. And initially, something that we have like thought about as like the main problem for this was deciding actually which advisor you need to follow at a particular state in the target task. And Lecter, one of the works that you cited earlier, is something that we looked earlier as a potential solution for that. Yeah, because Lecter is like concerned with action advising basically. So this is definitely like very useful to our research too.
Cool, because I saw that paper on the few-shot teamwork. I didn't get a chance to read it, but that did have a feeling of transfer learning or lifelong learning, but in the ad hoc teamwork setting. So that was pretty cool.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I'm Elliot, by the way, so and I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, I actually did a couple like investigations with Lecter and so on. I mean, there's some differences between the framing because we're trying to transfer between different tasks, and Lecter, as it was initially set up, the way that it was trained is like kind of focused on one task, and so basically the kind of conclusion that we came to is that that kind of thing isn't like super well suited immediately for our task, because there's kind of teachers who are trained in one domain don't necessarily have anything useful to teach students who are coming from another domain. Yeah, I mean, without wanting to like talk about it for too long, there were some kind of issues there, but I do think that teaching in general and lecture type approaches, if you can get them to work, which also sometimes we struggled with, but if you can get them to work, they do seem fairly promising for kind of where you already know what the domain is going to be. Then I think teaching type approaches seem kind of like a way to sort of bootstrap the sort of, okay, now when we have the ad hoc interaction, I already have a teaching policy in place for kind of telling the right agents what to do. But in terms of transfer in kind of between different environments, I think there are some like further issues.
Yeah, and think so in transfer learning, you often think about, I'm gonna have a library of policies. I'm gonna figure out which one to use. But in an ad hoc teamwork setting, you may want to think about, I've got a set of teaching strategies for different types of teammates, or I've got a set of policies that I can use depending on who I'm working with. Because, you know, if I'm playing RoboCup and I'm playing someone on the team as a ball hog, like Patrick's method can recognize that. But if I'm stuck playing with this dude, I better figure out how to work with him.
So I have a comment in a bit. Matt, can you hear me? This is Peter.
Yep.
Good. So it strikes me that often in a student teaching kind of setup, it's explicit, right? The student knows that the student's the student, and the teacher knows that the teacher's the teacher. In an ad hoc teamwork setting, you may be both a student and a teacher, but implicitly, right? I mean, it's you know, if the other agent has the capacity to learn, then, you know, if your teammate has the capacity to learn, then it's a good ad hoc teamwork strategy to try to teach them. If they don't have the capacity to learn, then you're going to be wasting your time. But if they do pay attention to what you do, then even without establishing that I'm going to teach you something, you may take actions that train them to predict what your future actions are going to be. And, you know, on the other end, sort of analogously, you could, you know, without them knowing that they're teaching you, you can be learning from them. So they're acting as your teacher. So it does seem like there's in the ad hoc teamwork setting, there's this sort of unique opportunity to study teaching and learning without that relationship being explicit a priority.
Cool, thanks, Peter. I completely agree with that. And this can be both the explicit communication. You may or may not listen to me, but I really like the implicit and suggestion. So if you're working with someone, you think they're a learning agent, and I can do things so that they can better understand how I'm going to act, I think that would be awesome. And I think that should pay off, it seems like. But yeah, and I think go ahead.
Oh, sorry, there's this work, I forgot, I think it's David Fell on pedagogical pragmatic value alignment, where basically from the end of the teacher, you're not just demonstrating, it's from the world of learning from demonstration. So the point is that you're not just demonstrating, you're doing pedagogical demonstrations. You want to the learner to understand that you are now teaching them something. And on the other hand, from the learner, you understand that what you've observed has some pragmatic meaning. So you can learn also from what has not been demonstrated to you. So I don't remember the link. I can share it. I'll look it up and I'll share it in the chat for people to look at if they're interested.
Well, and that, Ruth, that's a really nice connection into Jerry Zhu's work on machine teaching. So if I'm trying to train a classifier, a binary classifier, I probably want to give a bunch of examples really near to the decision border, and thinking about, okay, if the teacher is giving me the optimal samples to learn from, so that also means if they're not giving me this other sample, it's probably not important. There hasn't been a whole lot of that in the sequential decision task setting, but I think there's some pretty cool work there. Awesome. And now the link is in the chat. I'm just going to put that in my slides. Just we can share these slides later if it's useful to anyone. Okay, so with that, I think I'm just going to go quickly through the and again, thank you for this. Hopefully this is useful for people even who have been at the workshop all day to kind of help tie this together. So the last thing I'll talk about here is what happens when you have more of a human in the loop. So if we've got a human teacher, again, we can provide feedback, action advice, curriculum selection, but we could also do more. And one of the things we could do more is providing explanations. So this, I believe, is an area that's wide open for research. So if I have a human that's saying, here's a demonstration, and on this action, here's why you should take this action and shouldn't do this, or here's why I'm showing you this demonstration, because last episode you messed up when you should have shot. If you can provide that extra context, if the human can provide more rich advice, I think there's a lot of room there to help, both one-on-one, single agent, single teacher, but also in these team settings. And when we think about if I've got an agent student, maybe the teacher's trying to help and the agent can help explain itself. So if the agent could answer questions, why did you do this? What would you happen? Then hopefully the teacher could provide better advice. So we've done a little bit of work on this, trying to get the agent to explain itself. So you could think of saliency maps for those of you that are familiar with those. That's actually not my favorite explainability technique. You could also think of where the agent did different things. In this case, it's Pac-Man, where it lost its life. But you could think of different ways of trying to explain to the human what the agent is doing, what's the agent thinking. Now, some explainability work will then go and ask a person, do you think you understand what the agent is doing? And I'm going to argue that's not a great way of measuring explainability. Instead, you want to do things like ask the person which of these agents is better, or ask the person in the upper right, what do you think the agent will do next? Because again, if you can anticipate what the agent is going to do, I think that's really important for teamwork or for advising. You could also think about, the qualitative, do you understand what the agent's doing? So in this one work, one thing we did is we showed that adding extra visualizations could help the person better anticipate the agent, which isn't too surprising. What was surprising to us is different qualities of explanations didn't really affect the human's perception of whether they understood the agent. So again, humans are confusing. Humans may think they understand the agent, but then when you ask them questions to quantitatively measure, do they understand, it doesn't always match up. So the last thing I'll mention here is, again, if the agents are explainable, if the agents can explain themselves to other agents or the humans, hopefully we can use this better to teach. Because if one of the agents says, oh, well, I shot the ball because I was close enough to the goal, and the agent is not reasoning about the goaltender at all, that's something you can quickly focus in on and correct. Let's see, just briefly, the last thing, thinking about if agent's teaching a human, you think about cognitive tutoring. But again, in an ad hoc setting, if you have a bunch of agents and you're trying to model a human, if you think that human will listen to you, and you think they really don't understand something, they really don't understand that you need to pass when another opponent's getting too close to you, that's something you can fix. Hopefully, you can give them advice, you can stop the play, you can review afterwards and say, okay, here's where you messed up. And I think explainability is going to be key there. So just wrapping up in the final few minutes, I've got 2 slides for advertising. The first one is I've recently been using this platform called Cogment. Full disclosure, I'm also working a bit for the company that has Cogment. If you are looking for a platform where you can have lots of agents and lots of humans collaborating, I can recommend this platform for that. So for instance, we have a setting where we've got multiple drones defending an airport, and those drones can be controlled by agents or humans. So that's, if you're looking for a platform to do this ad hoc research with humans and agents, I can recommend Cogment. The other recommendation, other advertisement is we have Hippo Gym. If you are interested in one human teaching one agent, I think this is a pretty good platform where you can integrate OpenAI Gym into a human interface and easily deploy over Amazon. So if you're looking to do human subject experiments on single agent settings, I can recommend Hippo Gym. So with those two final advertisements done, just kind of concluding, we're thinking about, who can help you? And maybe that's not an explicit teacher, maybe that's implicit teaching, but who should you listen to? Who should you ask? How do you know who's better than you? And thinking about, well, once we go from just agents in ad hoc teaming, what happens when you include humans? And that can get a whole lot more difficult. But it was going to be the point of my talk, but it ended up being kind of a side note. I do think explainability is important. And I really would like to see ways of using explainability for humans to help agents learn better. Here's my demonstration and an explanation, but also agents teaching agents. If you could say, hey, you need to go up the field because we want to get that guy offside, I think that could be useful. So with that, I believe I only have a minute left. And thank you so much for interacting during the talk. I know it's at the end of the day, but I appreciate it because I get to learn more about the workshop, but hopefully this was useful for you pulling a few ideas together. So with that, I'll shut up, and I'd love to have any final questions or comments.
Thanks, Matt, for the presentation. It was a great one. It's definitely interesting, and despite being tired after the long day, I think it's still like a great talk. So I think before I ask people online, I'll just open the questions to people in Vienna, maybe. I can't really see whether there's any questions there. Does anyone have any questions there?
Anyone online?
No, but if no one has a question, I'll probably ask my own.
Yeah, you can start.
Right. Well, I just
Okay.
because I guess it's been well a couple of times. I think Peter brought it up most recently, but I think I suppose this is something from also when we were writing the survey. I think I want to bring up there were some early papers on kind of in ad hoc teamwork on influencing or leading other agents. And I don't know, I just wanted to remind people that these exist because I think that's quite interesting. And also some recent work from Stanford, I think Stanford, where the methods are called Lily and Silly, where they kind of take this into a sort of latent space and consider, for example, instead of teaching agents directly, we try to influence them based on we act in a certain way, and their responses to us will end up leading them into certain behaviors that we want to see. So it's not like explicit teaching where it's like, okay, here's some advice and take that advice. It's more like we're going to try and get the agents to do something that we want them to do by acting in a certain way ourselves, which isn't directly teaching. And I think these are quite interesting papers. And I don't know, I guess I didn't really have a reference point other than I just wanted to either remind or let people know that these exist. And I think this is really interesting work. So, and others might be interested to look into this.
Oh, and so thank you for that. And quick note for any students in the audience. So this is a great example of if a bunch of people have done some stuff, and look, would it be really interesting if we asked this different kind of problem? And for me, that's one of the things I love most about this career, is being able to, as an academic, being able to define your own questions and then convince other people they're interesting. So that's really cool. So instead of, again, instead of explicitly teaching, what about implicitly teaching? And are there cases where that's actually better? Or is it just that you have a setting where the other people won't accept your teaching? Like some undergrads.
Matt, Last question, probably. My question is about like how you potentially use explainability in terms of agents teaching other agents. In particular, do you think this could be helpful in scenarios where there are multiple teachers that are teaching an agent, and these teachers are also agents themselves? Do you think that explainability would be able to help them decide which agents to listen to?
Yeah, that's a nice point. So I was thinking mostly one agent explaining to another, again, saying, go up, go to this sub goal, because if you don't, you'll get eaten by this ghost. I think that would be useful. But now that you say, what about multiple teachers? So one teacher is saying, go to this power pill so that you can save yourself. And another one is saying, eat this other dot so that you end the level. Then maybe the student or the other agent can decide, oh, okay, I could see why they're both saying this, but actually I want to prioritize winning the level. And, I don't really care about getting those last points. So I could see, to your point, explainability being useful for trying to figure out who to listen to in this multi-agent space. So, nice idea.